This is a Founding Media podcast, produced at Austin Community College District. Welcome back to Science in the Mall, y'all. I'm your co-host, Dan Dillard, alongside Nancy Lyon. And we're back for part 2 of our discussion with Liz and Barrett. We talk more about their experiences at ABI with diagnostics company Nuclein, and get into what the hiring process for a bioscience startup is like. Liz and Barrett explain why students should apply for jobs even if they think they may not be qualified, and explore the intersection of business and biotech, illustrating how spaces like ACC Bioscience Incubator make it possible for companies like Nuclein to conduct innovative, life-saving science without an immense amount of funding. Liz and Barrett close out the conversation sharing their favorite thing about their job and offering advice to our listeners who might want to join the bioscience industry. Let's get into it. I want to switch gears and talk a little bit, just for the benefit of the audience and the students that are thinking about, the hiring process at a lab. Barrett, you helped hire Liz, and I really want to get both your perspectives, and can you share what that experience was like from your perspectives, and think about what interviewers typically look for in the hiring process and what interviews can expect. And so if you guys can both just chat about that experience uniquely.
Yeah, I think I think it is heavily dependent on the position, right? For Elizabeth, we were looking to bring on just general helping hand. And usually that's the case for most hires, actually. Obviously, if you need to hire, again, someone that's really specialized, then you want to ask them, the super technical questions that they need to know. But, when it comes to a lab technician or entry-level scientist role, it's really the question you're asking yourself is this someone that I'm going to enjoy working with? There are some technical questions like, if you need to make 1 liter of buffer from a 10x stock, how much stock and how much water would you mix to make that, and that's a pretty low bar to pass. If someone can answer that question, then it usually indicates, they're really nervous or they really don't know anything. But, it was interesting for me with Elizabeth because Elizabeth was the first person that I've ever been involved in, if someone asked me, hey, do you think we should hire her? So it was interesting for me as well. But again, I think it really boils down to, is this someone that I want to work with? Because everything that you need to know, you'll be taught on the job. Again, right. Unless it's for something super specific that, you're the world's leading expert on. But, for most entry-level positions in a laboratory, that's not going to be the case.
Yeah, we've heard that before, where it's more a matter of, if you got your base knowledge, it's more a matter of, is this person going to be easy to as a team member to work with on a daily basis? Is it, some people have even said, is it part of the family that we want to bring in? So that's unique. It's interesting that you brought that up as well. What about you, Liz? What was your experience like?
So I think we've kind of been given good service from Nuclein, because we've really been, our main point in the interview process is to make sure we can work with them. Right. I don't know if this is typical. I do not think it is typical, but every applicant that has come to Nuclein after me has sat down with literally every employee in the lab and sectioned groups just to kind of talk to them, give them like the scary math questions that Barrett gives. My favorite is that, how do you make a 10x buffer or something? Because that should be the easiest question ever, right? You just move a decimal point and you got it. But it's can you sit in a lab, be asked a lab math question and not like melt into a puddle from it? But that, I really think that's only about a fifth to maybe a little bit more of what we ask them. It's also just like, hey, like, are you passionate about science? Like, hey, we're still in a startup. If you get asked to work more than 40 hours a week, or if an experiment fails at 4 p.m. on a Friday, but we really need that data, are you willing to stick around and try to make it work? Right. So I don't know if that's how everyone does it. I am sure Nuclein can't keep that up for how big we're getting, but that's definitely what our experience has been like afterwards.
It's something as small as, making sure you shampoo your hair the morning that you have an interview. I think I shared in our pre-interview that we had an individual who came in once who it didn't look like they had showered in what looked like weeks. And so, I think just really the basics, right? Like, making sure that you look, nice. You don't have to be wearing a tuxedo, but, try to, tuck in your shirt, wear dress shoes if you have them. No one's gonna look down on you for not having, super nice clothes, but it's just all about the perceived effort. And so when you come in with really greasy hair and your shirt is all wrinkled and, that just kind of doesn't give off a good first impression.
It's interesting, Barrett, when you were saying before that this whole imposter syndrome, and like when you got interviewed, you're like, oh my God, somebody's more qualified than me. And yet what you guys just said is totally true. It's like, you're going to have to get trained on the job. And so even if you do know all that stuff, you're probably going to have to do it my way. And I'm going to have to retrain you anyhow.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And yet you're still going to like not apply because there was that one line that said I'm supposed to be able to whatever. And if you've ever written a job description, you're guessing. You're like, oh, what else do I think they need to know? Oh, I know. Oh, we should put. And it's not gospel, right? It's like
no.
And everything
like
that
spitting in a tube, that wasn't in the job description.
It should be on the job description. But like everything that you don't have, let's just say there's 3 things on that bullet list that you don't think you're strong at. You also have 3 things that they don't even know you have that are better than they ever dreamed happening, and it's both ways. And everybody does it where they're just like doing the negative to themselves, I
mean, I think you should, when you're reading a job description post, if you even meet, 1/3 of the credentials, just go ahead and apply. It doesn't hurt.
Great advice.
I would certainly give my just like the advice my dad gave me, anyone who's listening to this, who's wondering, should they apply for the job? Oh, I might not be qualified for that job. Just apply. I mean, the worst thing that can happen is, they don't respond at all. But the second worst thing that can happen is, they just say no, so.
Right.
If they bring you in for an interview, your resume has already told them that you meet the base requirements, right? So at that point, it's just proving that you're a professional individual that did apply for this job. I mean, we all need money, but like you applied for a specific job in a biotechnology field because biotechnology is the field you want to be in. So just show that part of yourself and maybe practice some lab math on the way there. And like Barrett said, just present professionally. That's
get your 10x stock out. So just because I think it kind of got glossed over and I just don't want to make sure you don't miss it is, we've already been talking about the fact that Liz was an intern here at ABI, which meant she was an ACC student. But she mentioned before I went back to school, and I think that got glossed over, is the fact that which school are we talking about? What are you doing in that?
Oh, yeah. I'm at Texas State. I'm finishing up a biochemistry degree because what's very different about me than most people applying starting from today or later is that before I went to finish my 4-year degree, the pandemic hit, and I was like, I'm not going to do online school. I'm going to get paid instead. So there was that period. I worked at Nuclein for about 19, 20 months before I went back to school. So I'm currently in San Marcos right now as I sit, going to Texas State, finishing up the last few years of my biochemistry degree. And that's so much fun.
So having a job didn't discourage you from doing that?
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, no, it absolutely encouraged me to go back to school because there was just all the times there were things that, I could learn on the job, but I continuously found myself, particularly with Barrett, it's a good thing he's here, that like there'd be something that's brought up in conversation and Barrett would just say, like, what if we added more salt to the mix? Or, could it be the sugars we're using? And I would just be like, I don't know what those things do in a PCR assay. And he just did. And for a while, I knew it was kind of a learning curve. But it was also the fact that when I got hired from Nuclein, I only had the general associate's degree, the 2 years, So the classes I'm taking now are like the organic chemistry. I start my biochemistry classes next semester. So it really just was at the end of really within the first 6 months of being at Nuclein, I was like, okay, I want to be here to help this company get off the ground, but I have not reached my full potential, and I don't mind saying it. I turned 26 this year. So it's frustrating for me to still have a few more years of school left. I know I'm not ancient, but I'm definitely in the age group where most of my peers are not in school. They work full time. They have a savings account, at least in the, multiple digits. So it's kind of a vulnerable place for me to be at, but I know school is the answer, right? Even if I stop at the bachelor's degree, that's at least going to give me more information that I need. It's going to teach me what I think is most important. And that's just how to learn, right? If you have the basics, I mean, going into our Nuclein is so specific, right? It is PCR diagnostics. No one has a degree in PCR diagnostics, right? But plenty of people have a molecular science degree. Plenty of people have a biochemistry degree. So when you get hired at Nuclein, you have these twiddles of information in the back of your head of, I remember learning about this. I remember learning about assay development. Maybe at a previous job, you weren't in that department. School can be a good tool, and the best thing you can do is know how far you want to go with it. I know I want at least the bachelor's degree. I went to Texas State because they have a +1 master's degree, so I can get a master's in biochemistry in just another year. But ultimately, it's really just to check the box, right? I know I could have kept learning at Nuclein. I just wanted to be able to have that degree too, just in case I ever look for other jobs.
That's something that Barrett also mentioned, and we can just, Barrett, I want to ask you, as someone on the hiring team, Liz just shared her perspective on her desires for higher education. But someone on the hiring team, what's your perception on the attitude towards higher education in your field? Do you have to go to school, get a 4-year degree or a PhD to have certain positions, or is that more of a myth?
Unfortunately, I'm not high enough in the hiring process to really be able to give you a complete answer. But I think the idea that you need a PhD to be a scientist is outdated. Out of all of our most senior scientists here, in the entire biology department, there's only 3 people that have PhDs, okay. Which might be surprising to a lot of people. I think that certain figureheads, like if you're the leader of the R&D department or you're the chief scientific officer, I think from an optics perspective for investors, from the outside looking in, it's good because people are more comfortable with people that have letters in front of their names. Right. But in terms of practicality, or are you going to use anything you learned in your PhD at your job? You'll use general skills, but that one specific gene in mice that downregulates some random receptor that you got your PhD on, nobody cares.
Right.
And so
so much more that you're not going to use probably.
Exactly. I really think that higher education is good. Having a bachelor's, I think, is very, very useful. Just for me, mainly the main benefit of a bachelor's is being exposed to research. Right. If I didn't get a bachelor's degree, I probably wouldn't be doing science right now. Right. But from a hiring perspective, again, unless you're hiring for a very specialized position, like you're hiring someone who's going to formulate your PCR assay, which can be a very complex task. That might be a situation where you hire someone who has a PhD, or you hire someone who has prior experience doing that. So I don't think it's you must have both. It's kind of a one or the other sort of thing.
Right. Based on your experience at ABI, how did incubating at ABI impact Nuclein's development and growth as a company? Like, what were some of the things that you experienced at ABI that was just both Barrett. Good for you and also for Nuclein?
Having all that equipment at ABI is a huge game changer, right? I mean, Barrett mentioned earlier that the tests that most PCR diagnostics are run on, we use the ABI 7500, right? And there's multiple models of it, and different places might use slightly different things. But if you're going to use a real-time PCR machine, you are looking into like 4-figure price tags, base model, right? So being able to access that kind of equipment, which we did have to buy one for ourselves, but being able to access that level of equipment without having it to be a direct cost definitely lets you develop some basic understanding of what you're going to do before you have to move on and you have to buy your own equipment. By the time we moved out and we're buying our own equipment for that new space that Nancy toured, we already had an assay we were working with. We already had a device that was amplifying PCR products, and we already had, our basic understanding of how to run the device, how to clean the device, and what the final product is going to look like before we even had to start paying rent on like our own facility. And that's a game changer. Thank you, Nancy.
Well, and I think something that's even more important, having all that equipment is huge, but there's really no crossover solution between doing science in your garage and forming a company, right? There are a couple steps in between those two things where, quite literally, Mike Carberg, my first boss at Nuclein started in his garage. Like that's where the first reactions were run. And so having ABI as a place where, you don't have to commit, $100,000 to, buying a bunch of equipment and leasing and, all the other stuff, it lowers the barrier of entry to, kind of starting your own biotech business. And that's really something that doesn't exist really anywhere else. I mean, there are a handful of places. It seems Austin is having more and more as time goes on, but ACC being the first, there's definitely a big need for cheap rentable laboratory space because most people don't have the money to go from a garage to a 5,000 square foot space. It's just not, you're not going to spend $1 million developing a facility until you're damn sure that you're going to make money on, the product that you're trying to develop.
Right.
And so, and
it's so true. And it's flattering. Thank you. But it's also like not enough, right? Like it's great for what Barrett just said, like these first, like make sure it's a good idea before you go. But then most people can't make the leap that Nuclein made. That's cost prohibitive. Nuclein, and you can listen to the podcast from Rich and Alan where they talk about their previous endeavors that actually allowed them to have the cash flow to be able to build their own lab. Most companies, not so much. So Austin still needs a lot more spaces.
Well, and I was about to say, in the gap from garage science to being a big company, the incubator's here, but then leasable lab space is here, and that is basically non-existent in Austin as far as I know. So
you mentioned something during something that really intrigues you personally. So besides Nuclein, the growth that you experienced at ABI. Can you speak more about the intersection between business, entrepreneurism, bioscience?
So during my undergraduate, I started my own diagnostics company, and the intent of that company was to create a diagnostic platform for monitoring pathogens and diseases in plants. And so at UT, I took a lot of business classes, because at going to UT and getting the degree, I got my degree in biochemistry, I'm not really exposed to a lot of business classes. And I think that's a huge mistake on the university's behalf that, I think that everybody could use a good basic business education. Because for me, I have this idea for a really cool product for this company I want to start, but, how do I do it? And so what's really cool about ABI to me is just kind of seeing all of the cool ideas people have and how they're planning to monetize them. I always forget the names. John Higley at EQO, making money testing for zebra mussels in water. Like who would have guessed? Or, just everybody there is doing their own super specialized, super cool thing. And, I just find it very inspiring.
Well, just that there are so many cool ideas, because it's true that John Higley's a cancer biologist and he's using cancer biology techniques to detect and kill zebra mussels, which
it's a high concentration of really smart, really motivated people. And, you don't really see that most places. It's a very special place to be in the sense that everybody around you is, equally, if not more motivated. And they're all, experts in things that you would never guess.
Never do the rest.
And what I think is cool is that they're creating out of nothing. It's like, we're going to go try this thing that doesn't exist and we're going to build it. And you guys are as well. But all of these companies are doing that. They're like, we have this idea and This doesn't exist. We're creating it out of nothing. So I think that's adding to what you've explained. I find that really, really fascinating. A question for both of you, and I think we'll start with Liz. Because of the lag, we want to make sure we give her an opportunity. What's your favorite thing about your job?
My favorite thing about the job is definitely being able to work with this piece of technology that just it only halfway exists elsewhere, right? There is nothing that looks certainly not exact, but not even really close to what we do, right? The way that the device operates, just the inner workings within the device, and what the full product has the potential to be like. It's almost fun that anytime I try to describe exactly what I work with, I have to like start kind of thinking out of the box to explain these concepts, right? It's not even necessarily how complicated PCR is, because once you know how a PCR assay works, it makes total sense, right? And it's not just that you have to understand how we can mechanically make it work. It's like, no, once you work with these devices, it is essentially a machine that goes from hot to hotter, back and forth 50 times, but when it all comes together with our device, it's a almost pocket-sized PCR device, and it just incorporates so much understanding with biology, biochemistry, and medical engineering that it's both simple and a marvel. And I can never get over it. Like anytime, even when it breaks, and you have to diagnose what broke about it, it's fun to be like, was it the biology? Was it the mechanics? Could we switch both? Should we switch both? Or, can we really make these two things come together? Because the biggest thing with our device right now is it's sample prep and amplification in one. And that's just something we didn't see in the world until this pandemic, right? And it was necessary. So it's just a cool thing every time. Every time something changes, every time we look like we're going to go towards a slightly new variation, it's just really cool. And there's nothing like it. So,
Barrett, you mentioned earlier in a conversation that originally you wanted to be a surgeon, but you find this current role more fulfilling. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I was just thinking in my head how I was gonna answer this question. That's kind of the path I was going down. In high school, I really wanted to be an orthopedic surgeon. I had a major reconstructive hip surgery when I was 16 years old, and without that hip surgery, I would not be able to walk right now. And so at that time in high school, I was like, oh man, being an orthopedic surgeon, if I want to help the world and help make the world a better place, being a doctor, being a surgeon is the best way to do that. And I went on to shadow doctors and volunteer at hospitals, and all the sort of things that a kid that thought they were pre-med would do. And I up until probably the end of my freshman year at UT, I was still pretty set on being a doctor. And it wasn't until my sophomore year that I was exposed to research, more specifically making diagnostics, that I realized that a surgeon can only see or a doctor, anyone like that, they can only see 8 to 12 people in a day at best, and that's if they're working full days, 5 days a week. And so there's a finite number of people they can help in their lifetime just because of the limited bandwidth they have available to them. Now, on the other side, if you can make a tool that can be scaled and deployed and used at scale that doesn't require you to be there to help make a difference, you can help infinitely more people. And so that's what made research and diagnostics infinitely more attractive to me than pursuing the route of being a doctor, is that if we're successful in creating the world's first sample to answer portable PCR platform, I will have helped save hopefully millions of lives as opposed to hundreds or thousands if I was a doctor. And for me, that's really the drive of what keeps me going and what keeps me grounded whenever if I ever feel frustrated or, if I've had a rough day, thinking about the long-term impact of what we're trying to develop here, and not just short-term, not just COVID, but really, really creating like a unitary system that can quantitatively and continuously monitor like biosignatures in order to proactively manage personal health and like commercial processes. Like, to me, that is like the coolest thing in the world that could ever exist. I don't know if anyone here watches Star Trek or has watched Star Trek, but in Star Trek, there's a device called a tricorder that is basically able to diagnose issues with a person who's sick and, basically give them like, oh, this is wrong, this is how you fix it. I think, kind of bringing science fiction technology to life like that is really exciting. And so just the idea to leave the world a better place than I found it, and, really just helping prevent deaths that could have been avoidable had they been caught sooner.
I love it. It's, example of life imitating art, which is, I love when that happens, especially in the science world.
Are we allowed to know the progress? Like, are we allowed to know where you guys are in terms of the timeline of actually getting it into the hands of?
Nancy, I could answer that question if I knew. No, things are going very well. We've made a couple strategic decisions recently that have shortened the timeline that will make it probably sooner as opposed to later. The goal is to have EUA approval by the end of this year. But beyond that, I can't really comment because it's just, there's a lot of uncertainty.
I mean, I think that's kind of the point, is that people that aren't in the science have no idea what the process is. Like right now, we're seeing all this stuff happening fast, and people are saying, oh, vaccine came so fast or test came so fast. And like the whole process is like convoluted and out of your hands in a lot of ways. There's these regulatory bodies and there's all these things, and nobody knows that unless you're in this
and
field.
It's really funny as a scientist to try to explain that to a business person, right? Like you have people like Alan and Rich who, they want a timeline that they can go to their investors with and say, hey, we expect to have a product ready by this date, and these are all the steps that we need to take, and we're on track to hit that target. Well, those timelines are usually assuming everything goes perfectly, and
which
almost never does everything go perfectly. And so, trying to convey reality to people sometimes is difficult, just because there's a high degree of uncertainty in regards to research and development, right? It wouldn't be research if you knew it was going to work.
Right.
So,
and even all the delays that happen with like the supply chain, like everybody hears about it at the grocery store, but like if you can't get the little tubes that everybody has to spit into, or you can't get pipette tips to transfer liquids,
can't get tips or gloves.
Everything stops. These robotic systems that do all this liquid handling, well, the robotic systems are backlogged, and the control boards and the
right now we are being advised to place pipette tip orders in quantity of years. So
wow,
order as much as you think you'll need for 12 months, expecting that it will take 12 months for it to get there.
Wow.
I got some in the back closet. I'll sell you. We got the black market pipette tips.
Black market pipette tips. That's so funny.
You probably could.
That's funny. All right, my last question for both of you. Do you have any advice for people listening who are interested in pursuing a career in your field? So again, think about the students that are out there. What would you say to them?
So I'm only in the beginning of this, right? This is, for me, this is going to be the first full-time position I have in my career. But I got here because I took every opportunity I can, right? There's a lot of discussion, particularly with my generation these days, about the differences between how you get somewhere with how you start, which we won't get into now, right? But the best thing you can do is, if something is an extracurricular, or, if you don't have the time, you don't have to sacrifice living well to do something. But for me, I was a community college student. I had a roommate in a cheap apartment, so I could afford to, instead of doing my pizza delivery job at the time, where I was making pretty good money and I was getting 30 hours a week, I could work for Nancy in a place that was connected to the field I wanted to work with. even though Texas schools, right, they only allow you 20 hours a week. It was good pay though. It was $15 an hour, which is hard to find unless you're a student or unless you're at one of the few places that starts you at that. But there's always, I think, a step you can take, right? And in our pre-interview, Nancy reminded me of something that I always forget about, and that was at the time I showed up, I was apparently the only one that specifically came to that open house to look at the incubator, because I saw the incubator when I was touring ACC before I even signed up for a class. I looked it up and I was like, man, that's kind of what I'm trying to do, right? So, and that really is an easy first step, right? I don't know exactly what was going through Nuclein's head when they hired me, but I know I was able to come to the table saying that I'm passionate about this, and it's not that I've just sat back delivering pizzas waiting for the perfect job to land on my lap. When I found an opportunity, I took it. Right. And there's always a fine balance between being able to afford to live somewhere and doing these things. But there's almost always an opportunity, especially if you live in Austin. Right. There are biotech capitals of the world. I was living in Plano, Texas, just north of Dallas, applying to UT because I know I wanted to be in the biochemistry field. I know Austin was a hot spot. And when UT rejected me, I moved to Austin anyway. Right. So whether it's affordability holding you back or not, there's almost always something you can find to do that moves you forward, right? If you inch forward, I think eventually you'll be able to find the next big step. And Nuclein basically landed in my lap because I was an intern and the pandemic hit. Life's random like that. But there's things you can do to move forward, right?
I think kind of going along with what Elizabeth says is, take advantage of every opportunity you get. And if you can't find opportunity, make your own opportunity. I hate to say that because, there are people, you see all these Instagram, gurus online. They're like, oh yeah, start your own side hustle, make extra money, quit buying that $5 coffee to stop being poor. It's like, well, no, those aren't really the problems. But, I think that, work in a lab if you can, do the extra stuff, develop something about you outside of your academics that kind of gives you that extra little oomph, and desire to be great. I think one of the reasons that I was hired when I was interviewing at Nuclein is that when I was an undergraduate, I had started my own business, and I had tried starting my own PCR molecular diagnostics business. And, although I don't have nearly the scientific acumen that, some of the senior people here at Nuclein do, they could tell that I had the drive and the motivation to accomplish, whatever I put my sights on. And so, I'm trying to think exactly of what was said to me. But essentially, when I was being hired, it came down to me and one other candidate. And the reason that I was told I was hired is the other candidate, my boss, Mike Carberg, he said it felt like he no longer wanted to be great. Like he was content with his life, and he was not looking to climb the ladder any further. Whereas I was chomping at the bit to try to do more and more and more and more. And so, although there's a balance, don't do so much that you stress yourself out and, flunk out of class, but,
burn out at 30.
Yeah. Don't do that. But, I think developing a portfolio outside of your academics is really important. And I would highly encourage anyone who is interested in working in life sciences, whether you're getting your associates or undergraduate, work in a laboratory, figure out what you like, but equally as importantly, figure out what you don't like. Like for example, for me, I would never want to run an ELISA again in my life because it's just such a pain in the ass. And so, and then, luckily I found diagnostics, and I love diagnostics, and it's very easy to work on something that you love. So yeah, just take advantage of opportunity, just try to be motivated and, just find what you like.
It's an interesting observation. Like when you said that about work in a lab and find what you like, specific, first thing I was thinking of is work in a lab and make sure you want to work in a lab. I mean, there's like people that want to be doctors, but then they find out that they have to get out of bed every day and touch strangers. And they go, oh, well, I didn't know about that. Same thing, go to a lab and make sure you want to work in a lab. But also, everyone says, science or lab. It's like, okay, but there's a million different things. And what you just said about the ELISA is totally accurate, true. It's like different techniques and different brain kind of things and like things you have to do super carefully versus things that you can just like wing it. And, that's personality specific and brain wiring specific, and find it, say yes.
I love it. Well, thank you very much, both of you, for being on the show today. We really enjoyed and learned a whole lot.
Thank you so much for joining us, Liz and Barrett, and thank you for sharing experiences on Science in the Mall, y'all. It was a great conversation, giving us insight into the hiring mindset of bioscience startups and exploring the importance of things like education, attitude, and personality during the interview process. It was awesome to hear about the wealth of opportunities in the biosciences and how there are so many cool businesses doing important work here in our Austin community. If you learned something new or found inspiration in Liz and Barrett's stories, please share this episode with a friend. Tune in next time to learn about the career paths you can find in the biosciences, even the options you'll find working in the same company. See you then. This has been a Founding Media podcast, produced in partnership with Austin Community College's Bioscience Incubator, which is the region's only wet lab space for Austin's growing bioscience industry.